He grabs me and walks through a door. It looked like just a very small bedroom. I was scared because I knew if I tried to escape, I would need that key. He threw me on the bed. There was a small TV. My freedom was taken away from me.
Sexually assaulted before and after every shower, Jeannette Tamayo was only 9 years old when she experienced this traumatic ordeal. The little girl was kidnapped from her home, in the presence of her mom and 15-year-old brother who were both physically abused by the kidnapper. But unlike many other sad stories, little Jeannette wasn't going to go down without a fight. Inspired by her favorite TV show, CSI, Jeannette displayed great courage as she eventually outsmarted her kidnapper, buying herself enough time until the mystery man was forced to let her go. This is the twisted case of Jeannette Tamayo, the 9-year-old girl who outsmarted her kidnapper using her favorite crime show. On the summer afternoon of June 6, 2003, Jeannette Tamayo, a 9-year-old junior school student, stepped down from her school bus in Silicon Valley, San Jose, California. Unknown to her, a few steps behind her was David Montiel Cruz, a man who had evil intentions. This wasn't the first time the stranger was watching Jeannette. David had been observing her for a while, having had his eyes set on the Tamayo family. He had it all planned out for some time now and knew the family's routine. He knew when Rosalia and Paul, Jeanette's mother and 15-year-old brother, would be out of the house, and earlier that day, he had broken into Jeanette's home, destroying the locks and windows. Now, all he had to do was wait for Jeannette to return from school. Jeannette was used to walking back home all alone after coming down from her school bus every day. What she wasn't, however, used to was coming home to a slightly open door and a broken window. The 9-year-old was curious, but she still went inside the house. At first, she thought her mom had come home earlier than usual, but when she went to her room to find her window broken, she knew something was wrong. She hurriedly went back to the sitting room to call her mom, only to find out the cable had been cut. Everything happened so fast that before she could think of what to do next, she heard a knock on the door. It was a glass sliding door and she could see who was standing behind it. She didn't recognize the face, so she slowly walked to the door, reluctant to do so because of the questions he was asking and how he was peeking into the house. But when the stranger sensed that Jeannette was slowly trying to close the door, he put his hand through, opened the door, and carried Jeannette. David Montiel took Jeannette to her brother's room where he sexually assaulted her for the first time. When he was done, he tied Jeanette's hands and legs with a rope and carried her to his car, which he had already parked in their garage. He then proceeded to lift the garage door, but it was just slightly above the ground when he noticed a car approaching the house. Jeannette knew it was her mother's car, and a few seconds later, Paul Tamayo, Jeanette's brother, crawled under the garage door and walked towards the car his sister was held captive in. On seeing her brother, Jeannette could only say one word: run. Paul was just 15 years old, but the love he had for his sister gave him the courage to fight the strange man, but he was overpowered, punched in the head, and stabbed with a screwdriver. Rosalia, Jeanette's mom, walked in on a strange man struggling with her son. She tried to separate Paul from David Montiel, but instead got stabbed several times. Paul grabbed a frying pan to help save his mom from the monster, but again was defeated and beaten till he fell to the ground. David Montiel then repeatedly stabbed Jeanette's mother, giving him enough time to escape. Hurrying back to his car, the scream from Rosalia scared Jeannette. She feared her mother and brother were all dead, and when David Montiel returned to the car, she asked him if he killed them, but he only laughed and focused on his mission. He drove out of the garage with no care in the world. As they drove away from the house, Jeannette turned to look at her home one last time and saw her mother and brother limping, crying, and calling for help. To Jeannette, that was enough reason to be courageous. She wasn't going to sit still and ride with her kidnapper to her death. If she was going to die, she would at least put up a fight. She immediately started hitting her shoulders on the car's window, trying to signal other cars of her distress. When David noticed what she was trying to do, he took out his screwdriver and attacked her. This broke Jeanette's resolve as she became calm and lay down in the back seat, staring at the car's ceiling.
I just remember sliding down, laying there and looking up at the ceiling of the car and just thinking to myself, I'm not gonna make it. I'm gonna die.
She had concluded that she was going to die and there was nothing anybody could do about it. Hours later, she was in another garage. David Montiel was back at his base and his plan had worked, though not without some hitches, but he had escaped with Jeannette as he had desired. He took her out of the car and carried her upstairs to a tiny room with a TV, a little window, a bed, and a washroom.
He grabs me and walks through a door. It looked like just a very small bedroom. I was scared because I knew if I tried to escape, I would need that key. He threw me on the bed. There was a small TV. My freedom was taken away from me.
He then threw Jeanette on the bed and sexually assaulted her again. He did it so many times that day. Each time he finished, he would handcuff Jeanette to the shower and leave her there. Jeanette was devastated, but she preferred being in the shower. She would later disclose that when she was in the shower, he never touched, raped, or hurt her. While Jeanette was missing, her mom and brother couldn't stop looking for help. Help eventually came, but it wasn't as quick as they would have preferred. When the police showed up, seeing how badly wounded Rosalia and Paul were, they called an ambulance immediately. While Paul was getting help, Rosalia persisted. She wasn't about to lose her daughter and didn't care about the stab wounds. She went on to narrate to the detectives and other police officers what had happened. She was scared and worried, and she needed her daughter back. The police eventually forced her to a stretcher as she was losing too much blood and needed attention. With both witnesses taken to the hospital, investigators had to look for clues in the crime scene as no one else witnessed the incident. Detective Heather Randall, the female detective assigned to the case, found a large pool of blood on the floor in the kitchen cabinet when she stepped into the house.
One of the first things that I did notice in the garage was a lot of blood. I knew at that point this was a very violent crime. You start thinking, are we going to bring her home alive?
Initially, it was good news as a DNA test could have brought them close to the suspect. But smirks turned to frowns as it was of little help because the attacker wasn't injured during the altercation. Turns out the blood resulted from the injuries Jeanette's mother and brother suffered. Investigations were still going on when the detective noticed a CCTV camera attached to the house of a neighbor. After going through it, they were able to see the events that played out. From the time Jeanette came back from school with David Montiel following her to the part where she was molested, down to the scene where Rosalia and Paul chased the attacker's car crying and limping for help. They could also see that just 30 minutes before Jeanette came back from school, David Montiel had broken into her home to break locks and windows. The camera initially proved to be useful, but it wasn't so much of a help as the camera quality wasn't sharp enough to clearly show the plate number of the car David Montiel drove. The answer was there, but it was not clear. There was a problem because in California, it's mandatory to have either a name, license plate, or phone number tied to the perpetrator before a statewide Amber Alert can be issued. Since the detective didn't have these now, she had only one option left. Detective Heather Randall alerted the media, hoping that even without an Amber Alert, maybe the population would mobilize themselves and spread the word about Jeanette's disappearance, and it worked. By the next morning, everyone was out looking for Jeanette. The detective knew she couldn't just fold her hands and wait. She had to take advantage of the public outcry, so together with her department, they got service helicopters in the air with loudspeakers calling out Jeanette's name. They also organized press conference after press conference just to make sure Jeanette's name was on everybody's mind in San Jose. That same morning, David Montiel was watching the news. He knew what he had done, so he expected everything he saw on the TV. On TV, Jeanette's cousin was speaking, and as Jeanette listened keenly, her cousin spoke as though she knew Jeanette was listening. In her words, she said, "Jeanette, if you can hear us, just know that we are looking for you. Please be strong and don't give up." This was an inspiring moment for Jeanette. She decided she wasn't going to remain there. She would either fight her way out of the captivity or die trying. On the second day of her captivity, Jeanette remembered her favorite show. She and her brother always watched the CSI shows, and she knew a lot about kidnaps, rape, and the punishment that came with catching a culprit. She decided not to be soft or act pitiful. Instead, she befriended her worst nightmare, David Montiel. She knew kidnappers saw their victims as objects more than as human beings. Instead of constantly screaming and crying, Jeanette communicated with thoughtful words and kept her cool. To her abductor, she wasn't some shrieking, pleading object. She was the person who started the conversation. This approach is highly tactical and is considered a lifesaver in many abduction and hostage cases. The young girl said she treated the man like a normal person. She asked where he was from, and at that point he stood up, went to her, and for the first time since he kidnapped her, he smiled. Jeanette was disgusted, just like anyone who's been repeatedly abused would, but she endured, and instead of cursing him, she smiled back. David, who didn't know he had been fooled, felt relieved, so he didn't hesitate to go get the cup of water that Jeanette later asked him for. But before he went, he handcuffed Jeanette. In this very little period, she thought of what to do. She had noticed the handcuffs didn't require any keys, so she began to tinker with it. It was mechanical, and it didn't take too long before she noticed that if she could move her hand and latched on the bottom she saw, she could be free of the handcuffs, and she was. Now free, she knew she had very little time to look for something that could help her escape, or rather, lead the police to the monster if she got murdered. Quickly, she grabbed David's watch, which he had left on the lampstand, and went to the other side of the room where David Montiel left some toys for her to play with. She grabbed a little clay tortoise out of the other toys and ran back. Immediately, she remembered how a victim's underwear could be of great help during investigations, so she ran by the washroom and grabbed her underwear. While thinking of what to do next, she heard the footsteps of her abductor coming up the stairs, so she hid the evidence in her pocket and jumped back on the bed, putting the handcuffs back on. It was now the third day since Jeanette was abducted, and there were still no tangible leads of any kind. Detective Heather had almost run out of ideas, but what saddened her more was the fact that she had to inform Rosalia that they had no idea where her daughter was. For the family of Jeanette, it wasn't funny. They had not seen their child for days, and this wasn't the kind of news they were expecting from Detective Heather after over 48 hours. Rosalia wasn't having it, and neither was the rest of the family. Jeanette, on the other hand, was doing a very good job. She didn't have any choice. Her fate lay in the hands of the police, and she knew she had to buy time befriending him. David Montiel believed he had captured her heart. He believed she would now be calm no matter what, so he thought to treat her nicely. He even asked if she was hungry. Jeanette saw this as an opportunity to know and gather more evidence, so she said yes, and just like that, David Montiel handed Jeanette the cell phone he was with. He made her call to order pizza. He told Jeanette the phone number of the cell phone, and Jeanette gave it to the pizza guy. David also told her the address of the house she was in so she could tell the pizza guy. She memorized both the phone number and the address. Jeanette knew the game and exactly how to play it. A few minutes went by and the doorbell rang. David Montiel left her for a minute to answer the door, and moments later he walked back to the room wearing a smile with a box of pizza with a missing persons flyer on top of it. The flyer had Jeanette's face on it. He placed the box on the ground and looked at Jeanette with a fierce expression on his face. He told Jeanette that he would get rid of her that night, and just like that, he left the room. While this statement should have terrified Jeanette, she seemed more determined than ever. Immediately he left the room, she threw the pizza on the floor and grabbed every evidence she could find. She then stuffed them in the pizza box and hid them under the bed. Jeanette knew the box was going to be found one way or another. She wanted him to pay, and he did. Minutes later, David walked into the room. He grabbed Jeanette, threw her onto the bed, grabbed a pillow, and started smothering her with it. Jeanette knew if she could get her face to the side to gasp for air, she could continue with the battle. She tried and tried, but again, she was a 9-year-old, so he overpowered her. With no oxygen, Jeanette felt an immense rush of adrenaline running through her body. It was tough, but she had to try, and this time she won. In one last gasp attempt, gathering all the energy left in her, she pushed so hard and slid her face to the side. She was able to take the much-needed breath. Mysteriously, David Montiel pulled the pillow away from her seconds later and asked her if she wanted to take a shower. Really? Like nothing had happened and they were just playing. However, Jeanette loved the shower, so she accepted. After the shower, she immediately dressed up but still made sure that the pieces of evidence she had gathered were still in her pocket. And just then, they heard someone knocking loudly on the door. Jeanette wanted to scream, but David Montiel wasted no time in grabbing her and putting his hand over her mouth so tightly. Jeanette, in fear that he might try to kill her again, calmed down a bit, and they both waited for the person at the door to leave. They both sat in the room in silence till David was certain that whoever was knocking was gone before he took Jeanette to the dark garage. He pushed her into his car, put her back in handcuffs, and started driving at high speed. The drive was very long, and all that Jeanette could think of was that she was being driven to where she would be killed. She couldn't stop crying. She screamed and screamed, but then she wanted to make what she thought were her last moments make a bit of sense, so she calmed down. She believed she was going to die, so she kept assuring herself that she tried the best she could.
I remember just crying to myself and just saying, I did the best I could. I was just preparing myself for my own death.
But then she wasn't dead yet, so why not try till the end? She sat up, cleaned her tears, and started trying to remember the paths they were taking. This ride was over 30 minutes. It was longer than the first, and it was harder to memorize because everywhere was dark. She kept trying her best, and after a while, the car approached the neon-lit parking lot of a liquor store not far from the highway. The car eventually came to a stop and David Montiel hurriedly came down, opened the passenger seat, and grabbed Jeannette by her hair. Jeannette was scared but still had a bit of hope in her. With fear, she asked, "Where are we?" And he replied saying he was letting her go. He then pulled her towards him and gave her a stern warning. He threatened. He told her that if she ever told anyone what he did, who he was, or anything she knew about him, then he would hunt her down and kill not just her, but her family as well.
He grabbed me by my hair, and I looked around. I was like, "Where are we?" And he was like, "I'm letting you go." And when he grabbed me by the back of my head, by my hair, he pulled me towards him. He was like, "If you ever tell anybody what I did, or who I am, or anything about me, I will come back for you, and I will kill your family, and I will kill you too."
After that, he immediately drove off, leaving Jeannette behind. Jeannette couldn't believe her eyes. She was free, but she was still scared. She wondered how her 9-year-old self had survived long enough to escape the deadly clutch of a monster like David Montiel Cruz. She couldn't believe she gained his trust, but she also wanted to see her family. She headed for the liquor store in tears and a heart full of different emotions. Staggering through the door of the store, she met a man behind the counter. The gentleman asked her if she was okay, but before she could get the chance to reply, he recognized her from TV. He was so thrilled to find her and wasted no time in handing his cell phone to Jeannette when she asked for it. Jeannette got the cell phone, but she was still in shock. The gentleman, seeing this, took the phone from Jeannette and immediately dialed 911. When the San Jose police got the information that Jeannette had been located in East Palo Alto, they immediately rushed down to the location. Detective Heather was overjoyed to finally see the little girl with her own eyes, an event she feared might never have happened. She was overjoyed, but she knew she had little time left if they wanted to catch the culprit behind this ugly crime. Upon seeing Jeannette, Detective Heather initially calmed her down, but Jeannette was even more fearless than she expected. Jeannette immediately let her know of the pieces of evidence she carried in her pocket. She even asked for a paper and pen which she used to draw the house of David Montiel, write down his exact phone number and some part of the address she could remember. Detective Heather noticed how brilliant Jeannette was, so she asked her if she could locate his house, and Jeannette replied saying she could by saying right or left. With Jeannette in the car, police headed back to San Jose to look for the kidnapper's house, and while they were at it, another officer started calling every pizza place in the area to see if they could match the phone number to a complete address. It wasn't long before they got close to the house, and on getting there, Jeannette stood up at the back of the car and yelled for them to stop. She said, "That it." Just a few minutes later, Detective Heather received a confirmation from the pizza place that the place Jeannette had told them to stop was, in fact, the right address. In confirmation, the detective ordered a tactical team and a K-9 squad to raid the home. With the help of the layout description of the home Jeannette gave, the team was able to determine that he was hiding in the attic. At first, David Montiel Cruz attempted to evade arrest and even threatened the officers, but the dogs were unleashed, and after he suffered multiple injuries on his arm, he was then taken into custody. His house was then searched, and the pizza box of evidence Jeannette put together was found under the bed. Immediately after the arrest, Rosalia was informed that her child had been found, but that was after Jeannette had been rushed into the ER. She was raped, abused, and stabbed. She needed medical attention immediately. Rosalia and Paul got to see Jeannette only after she was stabilized. It had been a tough couple of days for the entire family, but they won in the end. David Montiel Cruz was convicted and found guilty of 10 felonies and was sentenced to life in prison. There has, however, been no recent news about him. Jeannette had to deal with the pain of the assault on her own for years. She couldn't leave the house, stuck in the clutches of a paralyzing fear of men in the outside world. But when she was 15 years old, after 6 years of therapy, she finally decided to face her fear and stepped out of the house freely. 12 years later, the TV producer reunited her with Detective Heather, who, with Jeannette's help, had put an end to the wickedness of David Montiel Cruz. Jeannette didn't allow her ugly, terrifying past to take over her life, and she worked on it. She followed in her father's footsteps and studied law enforcement. Her goal is to one day help the community in the same way Heather helped her. Today, she is known for being the voice of the missing and every victim of violence. Also, she became the first woman deputy chief of police in the history of the San Jose Police Department. Jeannette's story was one of abuse, pain, and torture, but also a tale of justice, redemption, knowledge, and courage. It teaches us that while we hope every criminal is caught and brought to justice, we should always look out for each other and help ourselves. Where caution is important, knowing what to do and how to act in the face of danger is equally important. That's it, guys. Thank you for watching this video. In hopes that you learned a thing or two, let us know in the comments section what acts of Jeanette surprised or inspired you. Don't forget to like this video, share, and also subscribe. See you in our next video. Bye.